Gosh, being a CEO, I think is the hardest job on the planet. Certainly being a founder, I think is the hardest job on the planet. And hey, skiing was no walk in the park. Being a regional skier and becoming a three-time world champion was not easy. But I think starting a company was harder and making it work, I think was harder. And the football journey for me was pretty tough too. But I have an
Mm.
amazing amount of respect and admiration and appreciation for how difficult the founder's journey is. It is incredibly lonely. You will hear way more no's than yeses, especially if you go try
Mm.
to raise capital. I mean, like, gosh, when I tried to raise, we raised 3 rounds of capital. And when I tried to raise a Series A for Integrate, I think I took 60 some meetings and 60
Wow.
some no's. For me, I just related it right back to skiing. Well, you got to lose a lot more before you're going to win, right? And not to over personalize these things, but learn
Mm.
from every meeting.
Welcome back to another episode of the Smarter Not Harder podcast, your home for 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. I'm your host again today. My name is Dr. Scott Scher, and it's a pleasure to be back with all of you. So this is a really fun podcast for me to record with Jeremy Bloom. Jeremy is a neighbor. He is an entrepreneur. He's a dual sports athlete. I'm going to get into his bio in a minute, but this is a very different podcast than we've recorded before here at SNH, at least me. I don't usually talk to non-healthcare providers. But this has been this is a fun conversation. And even though we weren't going there initially, we had so much fun going through Jeremy's history in sports and athlete and athletic pursuits, and more to come in a minute. I'll tell you more about it. Let me give you a bio on Jeremy before I get into it. So Jeremy Bloom is an entrepreneur, philanthropist, and the first dual sport athlete to ski in the Winter Olympics and to be drafted into the NFL. He was on the Eagles for a little while. So he's from Loveland, Colorado, grew up with an incredibly active family, was involved in sports year-round. At age 15, he was the youngest male freestyle skier to make the U.S. Olympic team and went on to become a 3-time world champion, 2-time Olympian, and 11-time World Cup gold medalist, I think the most, and the youngest freestyle skier to be inducted into the United States Skiing Hall of Fame. On the gridiron, Jeremy found equal stardom and success, an All-American at University of Colorado. Go Buffs, that's where we live over here. I live close to Jeremy. We both live here around Boulder, Colorado. He was drafted as a wide receiver and return specialist in 2006 to the Philadelphia Eagles. An injury slowed down his career, and he retired from football in 2007. He has since been in college football and Olympic sports television analyst and has worked for ESPN, Fox, NBC, and the Pac-12 network. Coming from an extremely close family, Jeremy founded his nonprofit Wish of a Lifetime charity in 2008 in honor of his grandmother. The nonprofit grants lifelong wishes to 80, 90, and 100-plus-year-olds and has fulfilled more than 1,000 wishes in 46 states since its inception. And we talked a lot about this during our podcast. Wish of a Lifetime was acquired by AARP in 2020, with Jeremy sitting as the current chairman of the board. In 2010, Jeremy co-founded and still is CEO of the B2B enterprise software company Integrate, which reached unparalleled success. It was acquired by Audax Private Equity in 2022 for a very large sum, while Jeremy remains active as the company's CEO. So as you can tell, he has a very varied background as a dual sport athlete, skiing, NFL. We had a lot of fun here. He also has a book that's also a fantastic book to read. And so we started off this podcast talking about how Jeremy defines what are called bouncers versus splatters in his book. This is basically people that can bounce off or people that just fall on their face and can't get up. And this is really kind of colors his entire career as a dual sport athlete, being an Olympic skier, and also playing in the NFL. And we talked a lot about this in the beginning of the podcast. We then transitioned over to talk about specialization in sports and how Jeremy feels that this is likely happening too early in a lot of different ways, and how specialization really shouldn't happen until later in life. I was under the impression that you might be hurt more if you played multiple sports, but actually Jeremy has had the experience, at least, where being a football player and a skier was actually a detriment, he thought, likely to his NFL career, and injuries over time, most likely as well. From there, we actually spent a lot of time on his nonprofit, which is called Wish of a Lifetime. And this is a fantastic company. It's at wishofalifetime.org. There's amazing stories about granting all these wishes, about social connection, about experiences, about learning new skills or putting on concerts for people. This is 80, 90, and 100-year-olds. And what was so fun about this is that I was able to help Jeremy understand that he was actually in the longevity business doing this kind of work. He talked about one particular person that lived 4 years off of hospice after being on hospice after getting his wish granted. So we talked about how Jeremy was more in the longevity and health span world than he realized. We spoke about this in detail. We spoke about, even in his own life, the parasympathetic sympathetic balance and how he had actually figured that out like later on in his skiing career more than he actually realized. And we talked about how meditation and mindfulness and the middle way was all a part of that as well. So in the final parts of the podcast, we talked about his work as a CEO, the culture that he's been able to create there, and how we can all learn from his work in creating culture in his business in our own small ways, even if we don't have a lot of employees, or even our own practices if we work on our own. So this is a really great podcast to record with Jeremy Bloom. Definitely out of my realm of comfort initially, because we were talking about things that were non-medical, but overall we went in so many amazing directions. This is so much fun to record. So if you like this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe below so you never miss an episode. Please share with your friends and colleagues. This is a really special one. Enjoy. Hey, Jeremy, it's good to see you.
It's always good to see you, Scott.
Yeah, I mean, we're neighbors, which is fantastic. And yeah, the quick story is that we met because you reached out on Instagram actually after a podcast that I did, and it was so cool to meet a local legend who, I didn't know of you at the time. I put you in quotes because, I don't, you are a local legend, but only in quotes because I didn't know anything about your career at all. And then I had a few friends of mine that were like, you spoke to who? To Jeremy Bloom? And like they went to school with you around the same time. We're around the same age. And so I have, a lot of families with kids and their dads and moms are around our ages. And they're like, oh, we know Jeremy. He was at Colorado and he was skiing the mountains, and somehow he was to do these two sports and do amazing things all at the same time. So anyway, so thanks for reaching out, and it's fun to get connected with you and, be at your home and, be involved in the Boulder longevity wellness space together.
For sure. Oh, it's been a lot of fun getting to know you and learning from you. So appreciate it.
And now we get to learn from you today, which I'm really excited about, because this is the Smarter Not Harder podcast. And if anybody has figured out how to do shit smarter, not harder, it's got to be you, man. Like, and I think that the first thing I wanted to ask you about that is something that you've mentioned, I think in your book, you've definitely mentioned in interviews, is that you have this terminology used that it's called bouncers versus splatters. Let's talk about what that means.
No matter who you are, you're going to face adversity in this life. Everybody listening to this can think of one, if not many times, where the way they thought it was going to happen didn't happen, right? Or somebody told us we're not good enough, or we didn't accomplish the thing that we wanted to. And even when you think about the most successful people in the world, Michael Jordan was cut twice in high school as a basketball player. Mm-hmm. Walt Disney was fired for a lack of imagination as first media job. And, Steve Jobs was fired from Apple. So, it's just sort of part of life. These things are going to happen. These setbacks are going to happen. And, what was really constructive for me was creating a framework for how to think about these moments, because they're incredibly rich, incredibly powerful. In fact, I think they're the most important moments in the trajectory of anyone's life, ultimately driving them towards whichever goal they're trying to accomplish. Mm-hmm. And, early on in my career as a football skier, I didn't know how to deal with these sort of moments. And as I learned, it wasn't sort of an overnight process. It was sort of committing to the idea over a long period of time. I think of it under the lens of bouncers and splatters, right? There's the people that sort of encounter a setback in their life, a setback in their journey. Could be professionally, but also could be personally, personal relationships, mm-hmm. friends, mm-hmm. Those types of things, who just entirely splat. And they sort of allow that disappointment to consume them, to right. identify as them. They wear it on their forehead and they can never sort of move beyond it. And their energy changes. Their sort of zest for taking challenges totally changes. And so the other framework is you become a bouncer. Hey, that's part of the journey. It's not the end destination. It's just an input. Great. Let's take that input. It didn't work. Let's recalibrate the sort of compass towards where I'm heading, and let's go faster. Let's move it up a little bit more. And sometimes it sort of changes course. Goals evolve, companies evolve. But, as the more I sort of committed to that framework and learn from my peers and coaches and other, great professional athletes, I wrote a book about the topic called Recalibrate. I think it's over here right. on my shoulder. But, it's really, nice. was more about an educational process for me of diving deep into this topic, learning from others, and creating a framework for others to think about. But it has paved incredible dividends, to me in the sort of 4 professional journeys of my life, being a skier, football player, starting a company, and a nonprofit. And I think without that framework, I think I probably would have lost the commitment, lost the desire, lost the energy to keep going.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. So when you think about this balancing capacity, right? You said you learned this from lots of different types of experience. Where there come kind of some like seminal moments there for you where it became obvious that this was the way that you were going to not splat and not lose the sights on what you were working on? Was there like an individual moment, or was there like a person, or maybe both, that kind of helped you there?
There's a couple people. I got to meet John Elway when I was pretty young,
Oh, wow. Okay.
15, 16 years of age. And he was my biggest idol on planet Earth, and so grew up in Colorado, born in the 80s. He was drafted in the 80s. I always wanted to be John Elway. And he bought an Arena League football team here in Denver. And he called me and said, hey, I want to attract the younger audience to this game. Could we sit down and talk? And I almost lost my mind when John Elway reached out to me. So I
And how old
got
were
to
you?
know him. I was probably 16, 17
Wow.
years of age.
Wow. Okay.
And I got to know him as a friend. And the thing that struck me about John is he never got too high and he never got too low. He
Mm.
struggled. He had
Ah.
periods and moments in his career where he really struggled. And obviously, as a 2-time Super Bowl champion, he had the top of the top sort of moments. And what I learned from John is really the emotional side of emotional
Mm.
regulation, of never getting too high or never getting too low. And if you look at sort of other champions, I mentioned Michael Jordan earlier, he had the same philosophy, that Phil Jackson Zen, like you're never going to get too high or too lows in those sort of situations. So it was a little bit harder for me. I wear my emotions on my sleeve a little bit more, as they say. So I had to work harder, just based off the personality that I was born with to sort of
Mm.
arrive at that point. But over a long period of time, years and years, I sort of finally got there. And it was at a period in my life where I was really dominating the World Cup skiing tour. And I don't think it's because I did more squats the year before. I think I finally got to the point where like I didn't get too low when I made a mistake. I didn't get too high when I won a gold medal. And that year I won more consecutive World Cups than anybody in the sport's history. And I was sort of, as they call it, in the zone. But I would sort of unpack and describe the zone as embracing that mindset and living right there, sort of in the middle, in the sweet spot, just
Oh,
like
I love.
John
Yeah.
sort of helped to teach me.
I love that, man. It's like a meditation. Like when you were saying it, what often they'll say in meditation is the goal, if there is a goal, is to be equanimous, like have equanimity, right? So that if you're equanimous, that you're always sort of surrounding a baseline, right? You're not getting too high, you're not getting too low, but you're always able to kind of steady yourself and dynamically, right? So the situations are always going to change. I mean, of course, like skiing or playing football as you did, or, with John Elway playing football, like the situations are always going to get extreme highs, extreme lows. If you can sort of maintain that steady state, I mean, people have to do, meditation for thousands of years or thousands of hours at least to thousands of lifetimes, depending on what you believe. But to get to that state, do you think it was related to just constantly putting yourself into this flow state that kind of allowed you the accelerated capacity to create something that was not, like you said, natural for you? Because typically there's a certain type of person that just has that, right? They're very rare. It sounds like that John Elway was kind of one of those people, but most people have to work on it, right? Like, how do you think you were able to do that? Was it just because you were just putting yourself in that situation over and over again?
I mean, I think necessity is the mother of invention.
Sure.
And I lost a lot. I lost a lot. So, I don't think I won my first World Cup until I was 18 years of age. And yes, I would win some regional competitions and some junior national championships and those types of things, but you lose more than you win. It's just sort of the reality of skiing. I mean, look at the sport of baseball. If you hit the
Right.
baseball 3 out of 10 times, you're like an all-star. And if
Yep.
you hit 4 out of 10 times, you're like the best player in the history of the game, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
you sort of fail more than you win, and especially getting started. So I was forced into an environment. I better figure this out, because if I allow myself to over sort of I self-identify with those times where I didn't win. I would have never continued on. I would have never showed up to practice the next day and stayed 8 hours or whatever I needed to do to sort of try to become the world's best. And then there's a great quote that has always stuck with me that I think is true in sort of this topic. Never let the good days go to your head. Never let the bad days go to your heart. And I think about that a lot. And I think embracing that sort of concept, you never get too big for your britches, but you also never quit on a bad day, because you know that there's good days to come, and you're sort of like one step further every single moment, every single day, waking up every day, knowing that, you're going to take one step ahead no matter what happened yesterday. And I think if you can get there professionally or athletically or in life, if you can really embrace that mindset, life becomes a lot more fun because you're unafraid. You're unafraid to take chances. You embrace the setbacks. You embrace the failure. They teach you the best sort of framework for what you need to do to go win. So, I'm a student of the topic and certainly not mastered it, but, I've made some good progress in my life.
Yeah. Do you meditate? Have you ever meditated in life? Was that ever something that was part of what you did?
So I'm working on the parasympathetic side of the brain, because that's the side that has been my biggest gap, my biggest deficiency. I've been sort of a hard charger since I was born. I'm the youngest of three, and I spent my first 10 years of life losing to my brother and sister at everything. And so I think that that sort of programmed, me to like, hey, I got a hard charge. I got to show up early, stay late, do some extra things if I want to accomplish anything and not lose. So now at this phase of life, I still struggle with that. I struggle with relaxing. I struggle with not going and attacking the day. And I know how good it is for me and everybody else. So I've done, read the research. I totally get it. But it's not easy for me to do. It's much easier for me to go work out hard for 2 hours, sweat, and but then it is to sort of sit in silence for 25 minutes, but I'm working on it.
What's interesting is that with all the stuff that you've done, like on your sympathetic side for so many years, like you've actually regulated your sympathetic nervous system much more than in the average person, right? So if you were going to be, jetting down a mountain at 100 miles an hour, you actually would probably have a very low heart rate overall compared to somebody else, right? That was doing it, that hadn't been trained. So there is that kind of like that training aspect that you've done. So these are the things that you talk about, like with like the middle way, basically, like dynamic equanimity, like these are meditative kinds of ideals, right? So I think that if you were going to start doing more of that, like it would be a very easy thing for you to realize that you've been doing a lot of the stuff already. It's just in a different context is what it comes down to. So pardon the interruption. This episode is brought to you by Health Optimization Practice Association, a nonprofit organization training practitioners how to optimize health rather than treat disease. For this episode, check out our chronobiology module. This is our module that's based on circadian rhythms, the study of how our body works with the light and dark cycles, with sunlight, how our brain, how our mind, how our eyes all connected here, and how we can look at laboratory analysis and understand how we can optimize for circadian rhythms, when we should eat, when we should not eat, intermittent fasting, optimizing. All of these things are so important. Go to homehope.org and check out the chronobiology module and save 10% on this module by using code podcast10 at checkout. Now back to the show.
Funny you mention that, because as I reflect on my skiing career, early in my competition career, before my run, I would listen to like heavy metal or like just something crazy to get me like really fired up. And when I sort of, started to ski really well and master this, Zen-like sort of philosophy, I would listen to classical music before my race, and it would really calm me down. So I think that's an interesting point. I didn't really make that connection, but you're right. Like that was me athletically working on my parasympathetic side to be able to just relax into the moment, not need artificial things to get me up or get me down or whatever.
Yeah, it's like we would call it relaxed control, right? The idea that you have control, but it's a relaxed control. Like if your parasympathetic nervous system is activated, you can have that relaxed control. But if you're so sympathetically dominant and your brain is like, just going and going and going, and the blood flow actually to your brain actually goes down, and you have less, frontal lobe capacity. So your executive function, your capacity to like think goes down. And that's why you probably realized over time, naturally, as you just described, that you actually had to calm your nervous system down so that you could perform better and not rev it up, which is strange for people to realize, but you actually have to calm shit down to rev shit up in
Yeah.
some ways,
Right.
right? So
Yep.
that's super interesting. I love something you said before too. It reminded me of my son. So you were talking about like a baseball player, if they get 4 out of 10, like that's the best baseball player in history. It's a cute story. Like my son played Little League for the first time this year. And in Little League at his age, he was 6 at the time. Everybody gets to run the bases, no matter what. You just get to run the bases, unless you actually get out, which hardly ever happens. But of course, he hit it off the tee. It went directly to like the pitcher, in quotes, and then the pitcher threw it to first base and he was out. He was like the first kid out. And he was like so upset. He was crying and crying. I'm like, kiddo, people get out so much more than then they actually get on base. He's like, really? I'm like, even the best players in the world get out more than they get on base, except for this one dude that just is getting these ridiculous records right now. I forget his name. He's on the Dodgers, I think. Yeah, like, that's crazy. But I love that you mentioned that, because I think like most people realize that like inherently, but they don't actually practice that, right? Because if they continue to kind of go up against these challenges, like they become, like you said, like the splatter kind of ideal, rather than bouncing off and seeing the benefits if they keep on rolling.
Yeah. Powerful notion, especially for a 6-year-old. That's
I know, right?
a good lesson you taught me.
Yeah, you're getting there. Your kids are getting big and they're going to start doing all this stuff too. So, we were talking about this bouncers and splatters and the ideas that you sort of created through your work in the sports. And one thing I wanted to ask about that was on the specialization side of things, right? Because there's a big push now for people to specialize their kids very, very young in different sports and stick with that one all seasons. I know obviously you were a multi-sport athlete doing multiple things. What would you say now to the kind of that drive to get people to do, or get kids to do one sport and not any others?
I think it really depends on what age, and I do have a lot of parents who still reach out to me and say, hey, I got a 7-year-old, an 8-year-old, and they're saying he should only play, one sport. And I think if you do that at that young of an age, there's a far greater chance that kid gets burned out and quits than they become pro. And, as I reflect on my career, I was a part-time skier, a weekend skier, Saturday and Sunday. We lived in Loveland, Colorado. There's no ski resorts in Loveland. You got to drive 2 hours to sort of Keystone. So, and there was plenty of times in my young skiing career, 10, 11, 12, I started to compete, and, coach said, gosh, you have this, you have an ability, and you might be able to make the United States ski team someday, but you need to move to the mountains. And you need to go to Steamboat Springs in this academy school. And, if you want to make it, that's what you have to do. But I loved football. And those academy ski schools didn't have football. So, it was an obvious decision for me that I'm like, I don't know. I love these two sports. And look, like, yes, I gained a lot from playing different sports. You're working on different motor systems of your body. The kinesiology, right, although different, is crosses over. But mentally, you're preparing for different types of competition. Skiing was an individual sport, me against the world. Football is the ultimate team game, right? You got to figure out how to connect well and build a chemistry with 10 other guys on the football field. So I think, look, they built off each other. If it was my son, he's not going to specialize at 7, 8, 9, 10. Maybe once he gets to sort of 12, 13, and he really loves something and he's showing great ability or really wants to dive in, maybe at that point. But before that, to me, just seems you run far too greater of a risk of that kid burning out of that one thing you're sort of isolating him or her at than creating sort of the next world champion or whatever.
Yeah. And I also worry about injury too, because if you're just working on certain muscle groups every single time and not doing more variable kinds of movement, like you worry that you might not actually have longevity in the particular sport because of potential injury. I don't know if that's something you've seen.
I think it would probably play the other way because when you use the same body mechanics for one sport, you strengthen all the sort of ligaments and muscles that you need to do that one sport. And when you're doing other sports, it can take away from that. In fact, I felt that, I experienced that in football and skiing. For example, on the football field, you need a lot of ankle flexibility and strength to make people miss and get out of breaks. And in skiing, you're in a ski boot. So half the year I was in basically a cast. My ankle didn't move, right? And I actually, I think I probably lost some of the, muscles that would have been advantageous if I was just playing sort of, football the whole year. But again, I think it all depends on what age we're talking about. And some of these coaches are, I think, a little bit too zealous telling, 6, 7, 8, 9-year-olds that they have to focus on one thing if they want to be good at it. It's a little silly to me.
I love that you just said the opposite of what I was thinking, because that makes a lot more sense the way you just described it. Because, I mean, you're the ultimate example of trying to play two sports at once and, or, at very high level. And to see that there were some, it sounds like there were some really big challenges. I would imagine they wanted you to probably get much bigger for football at certain points, right? And because what position did you play? I think it was like outside receiver, right? Or,
I was a receiver, kick return, and punt return, and I had to gain and lose 12 pounds every single year, and pretty quickly,
wow,
from football to
wow,
skiing. So, look, I mean, when you look at two sport athletes, you typically, from a kinesiology perspective, the movement of the body is pretty similar. Track and field and football. Okay, well, you're sort of using the same things. Baseball and
right.
football. Okay, you're basically using the same muscles to go run the bases or swing a baseball. I'm the only athlete ever to ski in the Olympics and get drafted in the NFL for a reason, because they're just totally different sports. I mean, the body movements couldn't be any more different between freestyle mogul skiing and the things that you need to do on a football field. So I experienced both the positive nature of two sports, but also sort of the things I had to work on that, because it created blind spots and gaps in my preparation just because of the inherent nature of not playing that sport full time.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, there's certainly not a lot of crossover between mogul skiing and football compared to some of those other ones. So you had to make it more difficult for yourself than the average two sport
Those were
athlete.
just the two sports I loved. I wasn't thinking about it at that age. Like, oh, is this possible or not? Like, I don't know. I just love to do both. So.
Yeah, well, you have like your Bo Jackson and your Michael Jordans, right? That did basketball, baseball, football.
Yeah.
I think that's what's been most common, right? I mean, it's those kind of combinations, right? So
yeah, that's most common. But those are the guys
yeah.
I looked up to growing up and wanted to emulate.
Yeah, although Michael Jordan's baseball career wasn't that awesome. He wasn't that bad overall, pretty good. Did he ever make it to the majors? I can't remember. I think he might have. Right?
I don't think so. He might have got a few at bats, but I mean, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Michael Jordan, what he did on the basketball court was such magic and brought such enjoyment to people's lives to watch him play. And the Chicago Bulls in the '90s were just, gosh, I mean, just incredible.
Yeah, yeah. So I want to transition now to like your business career. Like this is like the first part of your life, right? Like this double athlete, two sports, Olympic skier, like on an NFL team, and then you had to transition, or you wanted to transition, or it was time to the business world. What do you think were like some of the major lessons from being a skier and or being in football and like that? I mean, I think you started a startup company, your own company, right? So you had like probably a lot of years of very similar ups and downs, I would imagine, when you first started, right?
My biggest fear as a professional athlete in two different sports was that my life wouldn't hold the same meaning after. And it's a very real fear that most professional athletes have, because for their whole life, their identity sort of becomes their sport. You're known as the football player or the skier or the baseball player, the soccer player, especially if you reach to sort of a pro level. And for all those folks, at some point relatively early in life, because the average retirement age in sports is pretty young, you have to redefine yourself. And countless number of former teammates, friends, peers would watch them retire and just feel lost, in the world. That was my biggest fear. And so because it was my biggest fear, I just planted so many different seeds and talked to so many different people outside of sports during my whole sort of career and trajectory. But the best thing I did was went to Wharton Business School, which is the business school at Penn. And it was through an NFL program where the NFL would get you into Wharton, Kellogg, Harvard, or Stanford, and they would pay for it. And you would basically take an MBA class, an abbreviated MBA class, and became very good friends with one of my professors, Peter Lenneman. And Peter would let me come into his office after practice, and he had this big $500 million private equity fund, and they would raise capital, they would deploy capital, they would invest in startups and all this type of stuff. And it was really there where I'm like, hey, this is what I want to do. And Peter became a great mentor of mine, and probably the best piece of advice he gave me is he said, don't just go and start your own company. Go work for somebody first, gain some experience, observe how to grow businesses, observe the challenges. His quote was, go lose someone else's money first
Yeah.
before you go like bet on yourself when you don't sort of know what you're doing, which was
Yes.
just, genius from him. And so that's what I did when I retired from professional athletics around the year 2010, and worked for a small startup running customer acquisition marketing, and didn't know anything about what customer acquisition marketing even was, but treated it just like, football or skiing, like jump in the dive end. I'm betting on myself. I'm going to learn how to swim. And as soon as I do, you better watch out because I'm going to be swimming pretty fast. And that's sort of, how I approached it, with a
Yeah.
beginner's mindset and excitement about being at the bottom of the mountain again. And then about 8 or 9 months in, the biggest problem we had in marketing, I said, we should be able to solve this. So then started a company called Integrate shortly after that. And it was sort of off to the races of being an entrepreneur at that point.
Yeah. And then during all this time, I mean, what I think was really awesome about your career change or your career transition was that you also were getting involved with a nonprofit at the time that you developed, right? When was the nonprofit started compared to this trajectory? And tell us a little bit about your nonprofit and what it does. I think it's an amazing thing you're doing over there.
Yeah, it's pretty interesting. The nonprofit journey was an interesting one as a professional athlete, because sort of during my whole career, my agent or manager would be like, "Hey, you need to start the Jeremy Bloom Foundation." I'm like, "Well, what am I going to do with it?" "I don't know. You just need it for marketing purposes." I'm like, "No, I'm not doing that. That's silly. That's crazy." But turns out I love the time I got to spend with my grandparents growing up. My grandfather flew 17 missions over Berlin, World War II,
Oh,
as a
wow.
B-17 bomber. My grandmother lived with us growing up on the other side of my mom's mom, and I spent a ton of time with her, and I loved them dearly, and I thought it was just such the coolest generation. So while I was with the Pittsburgh Steelers, I started what's called the Wish of a Lifetime Foundation, and the Wish of a Lifetime Foundation grants lifelong wishes for 80, 90, and 100-year-old people, just the coolest people you could ever
So
meet.
80 plus. 80
80
plus?
plus,
Is that
basically. Yeah.
okay? Yeah.
And
So it's like
we
the
will
Make a
grant
Wish
some
for
wishes
kids.
under 80, but
Yeah.
the sort of 90% use case is 80 plus. We'll go down to
Gotcha.
60, but that's more the exception than the rule.
Gotcha.
And 16 years later, it's been the most incredible journey of my life. We're granting over one wish per day now across the country, and meeting all kinds of
Amazing.
incredible people with dreams that would sort of go left unmet, if it weren't for Wish of a Lifetime. So really proud of the organization, proud of the work that we do, and just inspired by the people that we meet.
Yeah. So we know this exists for kids, right? We have like I think it's sponsored by the Make-A-Wish Foundation. And this is usually like the McDonald's is involved in this, I think, somewhere, right? If I'm remembering correctly, it's been a long time. When you started to create this organization, like, how did you raise money for it? Is it something that kind of raised money, kind of like you raised money for your own company? Or how did you just, like, I think you probably did this with your own finances first, I'm guessing, and then try to build into a company. How did you do that? Or what was the process there?
Yeah, development is always the big challenge for nonprofits, right? Because you always have to fundraise. In order to run your program, whatever your program is, you have to go and develop that and bring in donors and those types of things. And one of the great advantages that we have had at Wish of a Lifetime from the very beginning is that nearly everybody has a grandparent or a parent or a friend, someone who's elderly that lives around them that they love. And connecting to someone's emotional connection to your cause is what's the catalyst for raising, being able to raise dollars. Like, if you had a cancer nonprofit, it's harder to raise capital from people who have never been exposed or impacted in their life from cancer, or fill in the blank,
True.
right? And so, pretty early on, our pool of folks that connected to our mission was pretty big. And, I just sort of used my background in sports, right, and the influence that I had and the platform that I have. We would do an annual gala, fundraisers. I'm lucky to have a lot of friends who have hit grand slams in life, not just in sports, but, in business. And they love what we're doing. So that early support wasn't easy. It's never easy. But development has never been sort of, our biggest Achilles heel. It was really about designing a program that is appropriate for granting wishes to an elderly population that has a lot of
Yeah.
complexity to it. And
Yeah.
so sort of
Yeah.
learning through that was a challenge.
Yeah, that's actually really interesting to me. If we don't mind talking about it for a minute, like the complexity that goes into that. Can you talk a little bit about designing a program for 80 plus? Because like I'm
Yeah.
thinking about me as a physician here, like depending what you're going to do with these people, like it might be something very simple, like or it can be having them jump out of a plane. I don't know. I'm sure it encompasses it all. So what's the framework that you guys use, or how have you developed this?
Well, here's a couple lessons that we learned pretty early on. Number one, you
Okay.
got to be careful when you first reach out because you got to vet the wish, right? But if you call an 85-year-old and say, "Hey, we heard you had a wish to fill in the blank, jump out of a plane, go back to Normandy," it's almost like they're going, right? And so you sort of have to be very delicate and set the right expectations.
Got it.
Another thing that we
Got it.
learned, first couple of years, we would do technology wishes. Hey, I've always wished to have a computer. Great, here's a brand new computer. Well, they got tech problems, and they call you, and they blame you if there's a tech problem. And so that sort of turned into something. Okay, we're not doing that. And of course,
Okay.
we've had a lot of wild wishes that we can't grant. We had a wish from an 85, 86-year-old man to go back to Las Vegas and get laid one more time. So we can't grant that one.
You're not paying for
we had
prostitutes. Got it. Okay, good.
no, we were
That's
going
off
to
the
do
list.
that one. We've had blind women who wish to drive or have a car. So yeah, obviously there's the obvious ones and
Sure.
the non-obvious ones. But yeah, no, more complexity than we would have imagined. But now our program, over a decade into this, is just, I think, world class and overwhelmingly positive for the people that are granting the wish, but also the community. NBC Nightly News does a lot of our wishes, and news outlets across the country, even local news, and we hear all the time how much it means to the community that this wish was granted, and this person feels.
So you get a lot of these organizations that are covering the stories as you grant these wishes, and that's also been really great for obviously being able to raise more money to grant more wishes over time, I would imagine.
Yeah, and really what it's important to, Scott, is for us, our big mission is to change the framework in which we view aging in this country, is to put these folks first and to make sure we know, because we are youth oriented in the United States of America. I don't know if you've noticed, but we are.
I've noticed.
That's not a bad thing, but you gotta pay attention to the 80 plus. They paved our roads. They got us out of the Great Depression. They fought for our freedom on the beaches of Normandy and the boats of Pearl Harbor. Their contributions to our society are endless, and they're not in the way. Their dreams still matter. These people are important, and we got to wrap our arms around them and treat them with the same amount of respect, love, and wisdom that you see in countries like Japan and Scandinavia and Eastern Europe that do a much, much better job of appreciating and respecting and loving, adoring, that the aging population. So that's our macro mission here. And so, when we do national news or we do local stories and a 95-year-old's jumping out of a plane, which happens all the time, these are good stories to remind folks that, one, don't give up your dreams as you get older. Anything's possible. And two, let's make sure we're appropriately loving on and appreciating and supporting our aging population.
Yeah, I love it because one of the things that we definitely know is that as we age, especially 80 plus, like the amount of loneliness that occurs in this population is just extreme. And we know,
huge.
Yeah. And we also
It's
know that
huge.
Do you want to comment on that, please? Yeah.
We see it all the time. Isolation is such a massive problem. Think about it. These are folks who their best friends have died.
Right.
Their significant other that they were married to for 50, 60 years is no longer there. They no longer live at home. They're at a senior home because they need help, and their family members don't visit nearly enough. And so they're sort of confined to their four walls on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And they absolutely feel to the core of their being that society has given up on them, that their dreams no longer matter and nobody gives a shit about them. That is the state of mind. And so when we knock on the door and say, hey, that thing you've always wanted to do in your life, let's roll. Let's go do that. They're just, it's a state of shock. It's a state of shock. Yeah. It's a state of I can't believe that someone in this world still cares about what my dream is. And that's what's so fun about the mission. These are not entitled people. These are not folks that think they're better than anybody else. In fact, they think that they're inferior. to everybody else, because that's the way our society treats them. So
Yeah.
it's a very powerful experience to be on the ground of granting these wishes.
I can tell that you really love what you do with this. It's like there's a lot of passion that comes out when you're saying it,
Oh, I love
and
it.
yeah, I can tell.
Again, I didn't
Yeah,
want to start the Jeremy Bloom Foundation that didn't do anything, because that's what you do. I mean, I love the cause. I love the people. I find this generation to be incredibly inspiring, incredibly wise. They've seen the movie that we're all living.
yep,
They've lived through their 40s and 50s and 60s and 70s and all the sort of generational problems that we have. So I love sitting down with them. I love chatting with them. I love saying, "Hey, what could you teach me about life? What have you learned? What should I think about?" And I just feel really lucky to be a part of
yeah.
Wish of a Lifetime and the work that we do.
Pardon the interruption. This episode is brought to you by Transcriptions, makers of precision dosed, physician formulated, and pharmaceutical grade formulas in the form of a buccal troche. For this episode, check out TroCalm. TroCalm is a way to regulate your nervous system, to down-regulate your sympathetic aspect of your nervous system and drop into parasympathetic, your rest relaxation. Combination of CBG, CBD, kava, and something called nicotinol GABA, which increases the amount of GABA in your brain to help relax you. We need to relax. We need to calm down. Turn on our off switch with TroCalm. Go to transcriptions.com and save 10% on your order by using code POD10 at checkout. Now back at the show. I love it. I mean, I remember when I think I was in high school, I went to our local Veterans Administration hospital, and one of our projects was to go interview some veterans about their experience in World War II. And actually that transformed a lot of my life. I became a history major. Yeah. I really enjoyed like those conversations, and it was very, very impactful for me. So I think that we do lose that a lot in the United States. We don't like have a lot of the like that, cross generational experience like they do in like these other countries that you mentioned. And we also know that like that loneliness is a direct indicator of how long you're going to live, right? Happiness, absolutely. Loneliness are a little bit different then, right? You can be happy, lonely. Some people are. Most people, though, we are a social species. We need to be around people to feel like we're loved and that we're that we're valued, right? And that's a big challenge in the United States now. And I guess you're seeing this all the time, huh?
Well, we've learned that in the Blue Zones book. I mean, look at some of the places in Italy where they eat pasta every day and olive oil, but they're walking up mountains and they have 1,000 close friends that they get together with.
They
and they're
smoke,
drinking wine.
and they eat meat, and they drink wine. Yeah, it's
right.
Whatever, right?
So that social connection is so important, and feeling important and validated in the world is also really critical. We met a man named Bill Tiller, lives in Alabama. I love this wish, and I love Bill, the most humble man you could have ever met. He had end of life emphysema. He was in hospice, right? And so he wrote to us and said, "My wish of a lifetime is to travel the world. And of course, I can't do that. I can't get on a plane because I have emphysema and I'm in hospice. But do you think somebody would write me a postcard from another city?" And he was just thinking like Alabama. He didn't travel much in his life. We put this on our social media. Before you know it, he had thousands of postcards, thousands, Scott, from every country that you can imagine. And the mailman would show up with these bags. We went and covered the wish after like a month later, and his awesome. Whole house was covered with these postcards. And what was so remarkable, you turn the postcard over, and these people, complete strangers to Bill, wrote all kinds of information about what it was like to live in that country or that city. Bill, who was given a month to live, lived 4.5 years later. Their doctors could not explain it. And it was just this awesome. Magical, it was really this magical experience. I'll send you a link to the video that we did with Bill, because it's one of my favorite sort of wishes that we've ever granted, the wishes that we ever told. And so, yeah, you're right. I mean, human connection really matters. Feeling important really matters. Feeling like you're doing something special. All these things matter. And I think our country is absolutely dismal as it relates to creating a society where these people feel important. And so we're just one organization of hopefully a lot more that do it different ways. But we want to make a contribution to remind our society, especially the young people, to love on these folks because they're awesome.
That's a great story. I love how that changed his whole trajectory, right? It changed it from being on hospice, which for those that are listening and don't know. Yeah. So hospice qualification.
Given a month. Yeah. I mean, it's pretty remarkable stuff.
It is, yeah. To get a hospice qualification, you need to be like living less than 6 months. That's the idea.
He moved
And
out
you're
of
telling me
hospice.
he lived for 4 years. Yeah,
Not
that's
too many
amazing.
people move out of hospice,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
just a
yeah.
remarkable man. And look, we wouldn't take credit for that,
Of
obviously,
course.
but I think it was part of it. You
Yeah,
can see it
yeah.
in the videos. He just lit up that the
Yeah.
world cared about him.
Do you find with a lot of these wishes that they are connection based? They are being
Yeah.
isolated and wanting to feel connected in some way?
So the different types of wishes we get, one are reconnections. Of course, that's
Okay.
a big percentage of the wishes. And
Sure.
I'll give you another one. Ruby, Ruth, and Rose, three sisters growing up in Kansas. And Ruby wrote to us and said, "My wish of a lifetime is to see my two sisters. We haven't seen each other in 15 years." Now, we grant these all the time. What was unique about this, Ruby was the youngest. She was 102. And Ruth was the oldest at 109. Scott. So we flew three Centurion sisters to Connecticut, got them all together, and I went on this one, and I watched them communicate. They were all still articulate. They could listen. They were talking about sort of growing up on a farm a century ago, like at a time no one would
Crazy.
sort of understand. And it was
Yeah.
just like, it was so incredible. So lots of reconnections, but also not just family members. Hey, I served in World War II with 70 years ago, and I would love to reconnect. Let's go find them, and all these. And then beyond that, it's experiences.
Experience.
Jumping out
Okay.
of planes, riding a roller coaster, seeing the ocean for the first time, which was an awesome wish that we granted in Alabama. And then the
Okay.
sort of third leg on that stool is something skill based. I'm a writer. I want to publish a book. I'm a musician. I want to have a concert, and
Got
so
it.
those are sort of the three main areas of
I
wishes
love
that
it.
we get.
That makes a lot of sense as you think about it. And I mean, look, we know that when we feel more connected, when we feel like we're have a purpose, when we feel like we have a
Night and day
community,
difference.
yeah, it's a huge difference. And not only is it, I'm just thinking from like a neurophysiological side of things, like it's going to decrease inflammation. It's going to improve like the neurohormones in your brain, like oxytocin, which is like your love hormone, right? This is the one that makes you feel more connected to the world. And it's anti-inflammatory, right? You have this whole system in your body called the endocannabinoid system, which was discovered when we found out that cannabis had an effect on it. But all these sort of neurochemicals in our brain that give us bliss, that give us a sense of satisfaction, right? And they're all protective. They're all anti-inflammatory. They all give you the capacity to live longer, even if you're living in one of these, blue zones, like you said, and having pasta and smoking cigarettes or whatever, right? But I think there's a significant connection to the health of the individual, not only from a psychological perspective, but that also reflects, significantly on the physical. And we definitely see this, in my world too, in the hospitals and in like longevity world now as well, because now everybody wants to live longer, but if you live longer, you also have to wish for eternal youth too, man, right? Like, or you're
Oh,
just
no
gonna.
question. No question. It's
So
about health span, not lifespan. It's about how my dad always says to me, he's like, I want to die young in life as late as possible. Like, and I think that's probably a good thing to sort of wish for, So
yeah,
I think that's the
and
key.
and what you're creating with this nonprofit is giving them some of that youth back, right? So you're
Yeah, we
giving
see
them
it.
some of that
We really
that
see
health
it.
span. I don't know if you thought about it that way, but that's how I'm thinking about it.
I haven't thought about it exactly that way, but I've thought about it as like these experiences light up the mitochondria of those cells, and they energize, and that energy, creates maybe some form of autophagy where dead cells die and new cells are created, and you feel younger again. I don't know. I mean, all I know is I see it in their eyes. I see it in the pep in the step. I see it when we first meet them. The difference between when we first meet them and
Yeah.
after the wish, and even months, sometimes years later, we stay really well connected with our wish recipients, and it's fun to see that the energy come back into their soul. And
So you didn't know you actually didn't know you guys were a healthcare company, or you're a health span company. You're not just giving wishes of a
yeah,
lifetime.
we need
But
to change our whole focus on grant writing now because
this is like
according to
longevity is
you,
the new
we
thing.
meet the criteria of different things now.
You meet criteria, man. Especially if you're telling me that you're expanding somebody's age from like 4 months to live or 2 months to
Who
live
knows?
to
Who
to
knows?
4 years. I'm like, Jeremy, I think you have another area where you can go and try to raise some money here. You're a longevity organization, man. You didn't know that?
I do now.
I love it. I love it. Um, when I think of longevity and I think of health span, like these are terms that get thrown around a lot, right? So, but again, just living long doesn't mean you're going to have a healthy life. Unfortunately, now, even though we're living longer overall, I think on average it's like at least 10 years for women and like 20 years for men or something crazy, where they're not living to the capacity where that, they truly feel like they can like be in this world and show up and do the things they want to do. I mean, of course, are you doing the same things when you're at your 80, when you're 20? No, most likely not. But at the same time, like if there's a way to kind of bridge these gaps, and like at our nonprofit, which I think it's called Health Optimization Medicine in Practice. The goal is to try to reverse people's biological age or their numbers, their vitamins, minerals, nutrients, and hormones to when they were back to 21 and to 30 years of age, because that's when we were kind of the most optimized to be at our best and to be the most resilient and to play two sports at the same time, at least for one person on this call only.
Yeah.
But that kind of thing. So I don't know. I think that there's a place in there's a longevity, there's a longevity angle you can take here with the wish of a lifetime. But that's awesome, man. So I want to ask you a couple more questions about life in the business world, because certainly you run this nonprofit, but you're also still running your company, Integrate. And as a CEO, I'm sure a lot of this culture that you've been able to create there has been related to everything that you've done, before with all of your work at the nonprofit, with your work in athletics. Like there's a lot of people that are here listening, I'm sure, that run their own business, right? They may not be a CEO of like a gigantic company, right? They may have like a small office where they have staff members, or they have health coaches that they work with, or things like that. So what have you found to be some of like the best sort of cultural things that you found to be the most impactful to your organization, to kind of how things have been working for you that might be relevant to others that might be listening too?
Yeah, you hear the C word get thrown out a lot. Like culture's important, culture really matters. And I think the first question I would ask is, what is your culture? And I'm not saying like, how does it feel? Like, what actually is it? Is it written down? Like, are the tenets of what you believe good culture is written down and sort of understood across the organization? And you may be surprised to hear, I would venture to say 9 out of 10 organizations couldn't answer that, or couldn't answer it on the top of their head. Well, let me go back to the HR manual and tell you what our cultural tenets are. So I think, phase one is sort of repetition of what that is. And we've worked really hard at Integrate to design a culture from the bottom up. So, hey, what qualities do you like in a productive and successful culture? And then we've sort of organized that across 5 different tenets. Now, that's not a panacea. That alone will not create a good culture, because the culture changes every single day. I think the most important thing to culture is the newest people that are hired. I think they influence your culture far more than those that have been there for 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 years and sort of understand what you're building. And so imparting those cultural values into the hiring process is really critical. Finding people that not just have a resume of the schools that you care about, but actually have intrinsic ownership around what those values are, and if they embrace it or not, and if those work for them. So I learned a lot about it. Integrate. What I learned in sports was a good, connected, productive culture will outperform a better team that doesn't have a good culture. When I was in Philadelphia with the Eagles, Andy Reid was my coach. Now, granted, at this time, Andy Reid had an unbelievable amount of pressure put upon him from the Philadelphia media to win a Super Bowl. I mean, you could see it in his eyes. And so he didn't operate well with that type of pressure, in my view, being around him. And so that the team sort of tried to motivate people by fear. And they would say things like, hey, if you don't do this, you're fired. There's a million people that would take your job. You're out of here. And it created a locker room of a bunch of individuals looking out for themselves. And that's not a good culture in a company or a football team. Then I went to the Steelers and learned from Mike Tomlin, who's still the head coach there. And he was a bottoms-up guy. Hey, you guys set the goal of the team. I'm going to be totally transparent with you, radically candid with you. You're always going to know where you stand. You're never going to have to guess. And that was a Hines Ward, Ben Roethlisberger, Troy Polamalu connected culture. And that year, the Steelers won the Super Bowl with an inferior team. Not as many all pros, not as many fill in the blanks. that the Eagles have. So look, I'm a big believer in culture, but first you sort of have to define it. You have to redundantly talk about it. You have to build Slack channels around cultural callouts. There's probably 25 per day at Integrate across the world of, hey, this person is doing this. High fives,
25
hundreds of
cultural,
people.
so 25
I
cultural
mean,
call outs per
25
day.
different people on our Slack channel every day saying, I want to give a high five to Joe Smith because he did this. And Cindy
That's awesome.
Lewis did that. And the whole company is applauding, hundreds of people liking it. And so we talk about it at our town hall every week. So all these things I think are really important to, beginning to build the framework for what a good culture should and could look like.
So you do a town hall as well. So is that like where you have like a kind of community forum where people can talk, ask questions, like a full kind of open discussion kind of thing?
We do a town hall every other week, and it's to go over the updates in the business. It's to
Okay.
celebrate our cultural pillars. So we invite people to come on all around the world to say, hey, I want to give a cultural shout out to this person, that person. And, it's our time to come together as a group, and then you can submit a question. So, yeah, Integrate now is 500 employees spread across the country or spread the world, from India to the UK to the US. And so it's hard to sort of get everybody together, time zones, but that's,
Sure.
twice a month, that's what we do. And,
That's awesome.
culture is a big part of that.
How big is your Slack? Is it 600 people in a Slack?
Yeah, no, it's everybody in the company who's
That's insane.
part of
Okay.
that Slack channel. It's called Integrates, and people.
I love it.
I'm serious. It is the most active Slack channel at the company. Giving cultural high fives to people who are doing great work, and
That's
I
amazing.
love to see it. Yeah.
So you run the whole thing on like the main platform for messaging and communications on Slack overall for everybody?
We do, yeah. I mean, Slack obviously has 100 different channels that people are part of, like
Of course.
the
Of
new
course.
deals
Yeah.
that people win, or the new renewals, or whatever, tech problems. But the one that's most active is Integrates, which is our culture channel, which is
I
fun to
love it.
see.
I love that. I also wanted to ask you about, being a CEO. When you were obviously when you were skiing as well, these are lonely jobs. Like these are lonely positions, right? I know you had a lot of support, from coaches when you were skiing. Like, what have you found to be some really great resources as a CEO? You're isolated oftentimes as a CEO. I'm not one, but I have, I work with one, and I know that he is. I know how much he's got on his shoulders at all times. Like, what have you found to be some good resources for you, or some outlets or locations that have been helpful as you've kind of gone through your journey on that side?
Gosh, being a CEO, I think, is the hardest job on the planet. Certainly being a founder, I think, is the hardest job on the planet. And hey, skiing was no walk in the park. Being a regional skier and becoming a three-time world champion was not easy. But I think starting a company was harder. And making it work, I think, was harder. And the football journey for me was pretty tough too. But I have an
Mm.
amazing amount of respect and admiration and appreciation for how difficult the founder's journey is. It is incredibly lonely. You will hear way more no's than yeses, especially if you go try
Mm.
to raise capital. I mean, like, gosh, when I tried to we raised 3 rounds of capital. And when I tried to raise a Series A for Integrate, I think I took 60 some meetings and 60
Wow.
some no's, and you just, for me, I just related it right back to skiing. Well, you got to lose a lot more before you're going to win, right? And not to over personalize these things, but learn
Mm.
from every meeting. What I loved about meeting with all these venture capitalists was they'd all give me something to think about. Hey,
Mm. Okay.
I don't get this. I don't understand that about your business, or I don't believe that. And so I would take that information and sort of recalibrate the pitch deck for the next one. And by the 64th meeting, I got a yes. And it was Founder Group here in Boulder who put $4.5 million into the business, and we were off and running. And so I think it comes back to some of the principles that we talked about earlier. Don't let the good days go to your head. Don't let the bad days go to your heart. You're going to need that as a founder. You're certainly going to need that as a CEO. There's another sort of famous quote that, if you're a player in the NFL, you hear coaches say all the time, and it's, hey, you got to have a short memory. Don't think about the pass you just dropped. Otherwise, you're going to drop another one.
Yeah.
And so,
Yes.
embracing this,
Yes.
hey, I'm always moving forward. I'm always taking a step forward. The past is the past. It can help teach me, but I'm not going to be stuck in it. I think all those principles that I learned in skiing and football was the difference for me. Because if I didn't learn that, I would have quit 1,000 times, because Integrate was really hard. I mean, it took us 5 years to find product market fit, maybe even 6, where we were
Mm.
really struggling. I mean, struggling to make payroll, breaking loan covenants. I mean, my co-founder, did a bunch of bad things and had to exit the business. I mean, there was all kinds of things during that 5 years where if I didn't have the framework that we talked about earlier, there's no way I would have continued. There's no way. So it turned out to be quite helpful.
Sounds like it by a long shot, man. Well, this has been awesome. I really appreciate you doing this today with me, Jeremy. I know you're a busy guy. I have one more question for you, but like you've already answered this, like I think 100 times over. But just to kind of sum up for people, like the name of the podcast is the Smarter Not Harder podcast, and so we ask everybody at the end of the podcast, and I didn't preface this because I know you like thinking on your toes. Is like what are the 3 ways that anybody can live smarter, not harder, no matter what they're doing in life? Like, how can we live? Like, what are the top 3 ways or any 3 ways that so people can live smarter, not harder?
I think the first one is learn how to delegate. I mean, especially as you grow, there's this concept called founder's trap. And it's this idea that the founder will never give control out of these different things because they always think that they're going to be the best person. And, but as you grow, founder's trap doesn't work. It doesn't scale. So learning how to delegate, I think is really important. I think the second part is you just cannot be your best version if you're not taking care of yourself. And so for me, my assistant carves out time on my calendar, just like a meeting notice, where I go to the gym and I work out, or I go stretch, or I go do yoga, or I go meditate. And for me, it's getting good, high quality sleep, cold, dark, quiet in the bedroom. 8 hours of sleep is sort of the target. I'm not one of these guys. I can't wait to wake up at 4 a.m. and like, no, I want to sleep and I want to get good quality sleep. And I know I'll be at my best version, if I do that. And I think the third is try to surround your life with love. I think having a loving home or loving friendships and really investing in those, it just makes life easier. I have found. And any time that I feel stuck or isolated, it's because I'm probably not investing enough in the relationships that matter outside of the thing that I'm trying to work. So I will caveat that is balance I never had, in my 20s. Probably not even in my early 30s. That's balance I learned maybe later 30s. I'm 42 now, so maybe early 40s. But it has certainly made my life better, and the goals that I'm chasing a bit easier to accomplish and attain.
Well, having kids and a family can certainly help accelerate that process a little bit sometimes. Yeah. This has been fantastic, man. I really want to, again, thank you. Is there anywhere you'd like people to go after listening, maybe where the nonprofit is, or where people could potentially donate money, or any other locations that you think people would be good to go to listen or to find after listening to us today?
I just think it's fun to go to wishofaLifetime.org and watch the videos. I mean, I'm telling you, there's some of the most incredible human beings on the face of this planet on that website that you don't know, that nobody knows, that they're not famous. But their life story is incredible. And watching them do the one thing that they've always wanted to do, I think is magical. So wishofaLifetime.org is a place that I would send folks.
And you're a longevity company. You didn't know it until now.
Well, we're going to have you underwrite our new grant requests for the space.
I'm telling you, man, you wanted to get into the longevity space, and you reached out, and here you are. So, well, I hope I see you soon. We'll get out for that hike, and all the best to you. Have a good rest of your day, man.
That'd be great. Good to see you, Scott. Thanks.
Thanks so much for tuning in to another episode of the Smarter Not Harder podcast, where we give you 1 cent solutions to $64,000 questions. This was such a fantastic episode to record with Jeremy Bloom. We learned about skiing. We learned about NFL playing. We learned about sympathetic and parasympathetic balance. We learned about longevity in the efforts for him to make wishes to elderly people with connection, with activities and experiences. It was such a fantastic one to record. And of course, how to be a CEO, how to create culture, and how that really can create such a huge, vital organization overall. So if you like this podcast, don't forget to like and subscribe below so you never miss an episode. Share with your friends and colleagues, and we will see you next time on the Smarter Not Harder podcast.